He wanted my attention. At first, it seemed like a harmless request. A glance, a smile, maybe a simple conversation, just a small step to make him feel seen. But little did I know, that simple desire would unravel into something much bigger than either of us could have imagined. The kind of attention he was after wasn't just the casual kind, it was deeper, more intense, more consuming. And when I finally gave it to him, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. It started with a few casual interactions. He was charming, funny, and seemed to know exactly how to make me laugh. But as the days went by, his need for connection began to grow stronger. It wasn't just about me acknowledging his presence anymore, it was about making sure I couldn't look away, that I would notice every little thing about him. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, who doesn't enjoy a little attention, right? But then, things started to shift. It wasn't long before the little gestures became more persistent, more deliberate. Texts, calls, and messages that started as light-hearted greetings turned into something deeper, something that felt almost like an obsession. He'd be there, always present, always waiting for a response, always expecting more. The line between friendliness and something else blurred. I began to feel a tension, like I was caught in something that was spiraling out of control, but I couldn't quite figure out where it was going. The more I gave, the more he wanted. The compliments, the sweet words, the gestures, they weren't enough anymore. He didn't just want me to smile at him in passing, he wanted to be the center of my world, to have all of my focus, all of my attention. And with every new request, I found myself giving in, slowly but surely. But I didn't realize at the time that this wasn't a simple game. It was a dangerous dance, one where the more I danced, the deeper I fell. But here's the twist, when I finally did give him what he wanted, something unexpected happened. It wasn't the response he was hoping for. And it wasn't the response I was prepared for either. In trying to give him my attention, I ended up losing a part of myself that I never expected to be taken. What started as a simple exchange of glances turned into a series of choices I wasn't ready to make, and a series of consequences I couldn't take back. So now, I find myself standing at a crossroads. The choices I made, the things I allowed to happen, have left me questioning everything. Was this attention worth it? Was it really what I wanted? And where do I go from here? The story doesn't end here. The next steps are crucial, and the consequences are only just beginning to unfold. But for now, all I can do is reflect on how something so small, so seemingly innocent, turned into a life-changing experience. If you think you know where this story is going, think again. Because the next part of this journey? It's going to challenge everything you think you know about love, attention, and how far one person is willing to go to get what they want. Stay tuned. You won't want to miss what happens next. It wasn't like I had never been in a relationship before. I had, but this felt different. The way he seemed to move through my life with such effortless ease, like he'd always been there, made me question everything I thought I knew about love and attention. He was the kind of person you couldn't ignore. He was magnetic, and even when I tried to pull away, I found myself drifting right back toward him. At first, I thought I was just overthinking things. After all, people seek attention. It's human nature, right? I convinced myself that it was all harmless, that he was just lonely or maybe even a little starved for validation. Who wasn't? But with each passing day, the stakes grew higher. The texts became more frequent, the calls more urgent. And it wasn't just about checking in or saying hello anymore, it was about my time, my space, my energy. Everything I had, he wanted. I remember one evening, not long after things started to feel like they were spinning out of control, he showed up at my door uninvited. I hadn't even realized it, but when I opened it, there he was, standing there with a shy smile on his face, holding a cup of coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I thought you might like this," he said softly, handing it over. I took it without thinking. It was sweet, sure, but something about the way he stood there, so close, yet with a distance that felt unnervingly far, sent a chill down my spine. Hey, you didn't have to do this, I said, trying to brush it off. But he didn't seem to care. His eyes lingered on mine, and it felt like he was looking for something I wasn't ready to give. I told myself I was just overreacting, that I should be flattered, not frightened. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't just the visits or the constant checking in, it was the way he seemed to have a way of finding me. I couldn't explain it, but he always knew when something was going on in my life. Whether it was a bad day at work or a fight with a friend, somehow, he was always the first one to reach out. At first, it was comforting. Who doesn't like a person who is there for them? But the more it happened, the more I began to feel like I was being watched, like my every move was being anticipated. Then, there were the things he said, the little comments that stayed with me long after he left. I know what you need, I know what you want, he'd say, and I'd laugh it off, thinking he was just trying to be sweet or playful. But there was something in his tone that always made me question his intentions. It was like he was trying to understand me too well, trying to get into my head, make me believe that what he wanted was what I wanted too. I tried to pull back, tried to set boundaries. I stopped answering his calls as frequently, I let the messages pile up without responding. But that only made it worse. One night, he showed up again, this time at my job, standing outside my office like it was the most normal thing in the world. I couldn't help but feel a knot tighten in my stomach. I thought we could grab dinner, he said with that same smile, his eyes locking onto mine in a way that made it impossible to look away. I didn't know how to react. It wasn't just that I didn't want to go, it was the fact that I couldn't shake the feeling that if I said no, it wouldn't be the end of it. Something about him made me feel trapped, like there were strings I didn't even know existed, pulling me toward him. And the more I tried to break free, the tighter they seemed to get. It was clear now, I wasn't just dealing with someone who wanted my attention. I was dealing with someone who needed it, someone who wouldn't stop until they had every piece of me, whether I was ready to give it or not. And that realization terrified me. As the days passed, I found myself questioning everything. Was this love? Was this some twisted version of affection? Or was it something darker, something more dangerous than I was willing to admit? All I knew for sure was that I couldn't keep running from it. Because the more I resisted, the harder it became to break free. But I couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if I gave in completely? What if, in giving him the attention he craved, I lost myself entirely? The thought haunted me, keeping me up at night, trapped in a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and an undeniable pull toward him. The truth was, I didn't know what was coming next. All I knew was that it was only going to get worse before it got better. And that's when I realized, the story wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling that had settled in the pit of my stomach, telling myself that I was overreacting. Maybe he was just persistent. Maybe I was just scared because I hadn't let anyone get close to me in a long time. But deep down, I knew this was different. He wasn't just someone trying to win me over, he was someone who had become fixated on me. And I couldn't escape it. It wasn't just the way he'd show up at places I frequented or how he seemed to know exactly what I was doing at any given moment, it was the little things. The fact that he would drop hints about what I liked, even things I hadn't told him. He'd mention my favorite coffee shop, my love for a particular TV show, and it would feel like he was always one step ahead of me. I started to question how much of what I thought was coincidence was truly just that. Was he really paying that much attention, or was something darker at play? One night, when I was heading home from work, I saw him again. He was standing near my car, leaning against it as if he'd been waiting there for hours. His smile was almost too perfect, like he had anticipated the moment I would arrive. The usual knot tightened in my chest. I had told him I was busy that evening, yet there he was, as if my words didn't matter. "I thought you might want company," he said, his voice smooth, but there was something unsettling in his tone. It wasn't just an invitation, it felt like a command. I froze, not sure how to respond. His presence had become like an unwanted shadow, following me everywhere I went. I told myself I needed to stop this, that I had to be strong enough to tell him to leave me alone. But somehow, when I tried, the words wouldn't come. Instead, I let him walk with me to my car, and just like that, I was back in the same cycle of giving in. Later that night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a mistake. He was everywhere, his face, his voice, his messages. I hadn't realized how much control he had already gained over my life, subtly weaving himself into every moment. And then, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Small changes in my own behavior. I found myself checking my phone obsessively for his messages, wondering if he'd texted me back, if he was thinking about me. Was this how it all started? Was I becoming just as consumed as he was? It was all so complicated. The line between caring and obsession had blurred in ways I wasn't prepared for. And what made it worse was that part of me didn't even want to stop. I was torn between the unease his attention caused and the magnetic pull of his presence that seemed to fill a void I didn't even know I had. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't even know who I was anymore. I wasn't sure if I was making decisions for myself or if I was simply reacting to his every move. Was I still in control of my life, or had I somehow allowed him to take over? The questions raced through my mind, but there were no answers. Only a sense of helplessness that clung to me, refusing to let go. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, something happened that would change everything. Something that made me question whether I would ever truly be free from him. The following days were a blur. I couldn't concentrate on anything, not work, not my friends, not even the things I once enjoyed. Everywhere I looked, I saw signs of him, his name flashing on my phone, his face in the crowd, his voice echoing in my mind. I had told myself I would confront him, that I would set boundaries and regain control. But every time I tried to break away, it felt like he was pulling me back in, just a little harder than before. I began to feel like I was suffocating, trapped in a web of my own making. I couldn't tell anyone what was really going on. It was too embarrassing, too confusing. How could I explain to someone that I was caught in a relationship that wasn't really a relationship at all? That I was drawn to someone who had crossed every line, without me even realizing when it happened? How could I admit that I felt both terrified and strangely dependent on his presence? One evening, as I was heading out for a quick errand, I saw him again. This time, he was waiting for me outside my apartment building, standing so still it almost felt like he had been there for hours. I froze in place. The look in his eyes was different now, more intense, more urgent. It wasn't just that he wanted my attention anymore. He needed it. He had to have it. "Where have you been?" His voice was soft, but the tension in it was palpable. "I've been trying to reach you. You didn't respond to my messages." I took a step back, the unease flooding my veins. "I've been busy, that's all," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He took a step toward me. His eyes never left mine, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was like there was no space left between us, no room for anything but him and the weight of his presence. My heart pounded in my chest. "I don't like being ignored," he said slowly, his tone carrying a warning I hadn't heard before. "You'll learn that soon enough." It was then that I realized something I hadn't fully understood until this moment. I was no longer just a part of his world, I was his world. And I was starting to believe I couldn't escape. I stood frozen, unsure whether to run or stay. His words hung in the air like a heavy fog, and I could feel the weight of his gaze bearing down on me. Something had shifted. The soft, persistent attention I once thought was harmless had turned into something darker, something much harder to ignore. But before I could process it, a sound behind me jolted me out of my thoughts, a car door slamming shut. I turned quickly, my heart skipping a beat. There, standing at the edge of the parking lot, was someone I hadn't expected to see. It was Ryan, my coworker. He was looking at us, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made me feel uneasy. He wasn't supposed to be here. I hadn't even told him I was going out. "Everything okay?" Ryan's voice was casual, but I could hear the underlying concern. He looked between me and the man in front of me, my almost stalker. I didn't even know how to define what he had become in my life. I looked back at the man standing too close for comfort. His expression didn't change, but I noticed his jaw tighten. It was like he was calculating something in his mind, figuring out how to deal with Ryan's sudden presence. I felt the tension in the air snap like a taut wire, ready to break. "I think it's time for you to leave," the man said coldly, his voice low, and for the first time, I saw something flash in his eyes, anger. Ryan didn't back down. "You don't scare me, man. I think she can make her own decisions." My heart raced, caught between two forces, both of them wanting control over my life. The standoff between them felt like it was about to explode. I had no idea what would happen next. But as the seconds ticked by, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about me anymore. I had become a pawn in a much bigger game, and I had no idea who was really pulling the strings. The silence between them stretched on, thick and suffocating. I couldn't believe what was happening, Ryan standing there, confronting the man I had let into my life, while I stood paralyzed, unsure of what to do. My mind raced, my pulse hammering in my ears. I wanted to tell Ryan to leave, to get away from this mess, but I couldn't. Not without putting him in danger. I knew things had already gone too far. The man's eyes were locked on Ryan, fury burning behind them. But there was something different in the air now. The tension had shifted. Instead of charging at Ryan, he looked at me, his gaze softer, almost pleading. "You don't need him. You need me," he whispered, stepping closer to me again. The words hit me like a cold wave, but for some reason, I could see clearly now, too clearly. I had given him too much. I had let him manipulate me, let him get under my skin in ways I hadn't realized until now. This wasn't love, or affection, or attention. It was control. And I had let it happen. With a deep breath, I stepped between them, facing the man. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady. "I'm done with all of this." For a moment, he didn't react. His eyes darkened, but then, something in his face shifted, like a mask cracking. He took a step back, the intensity draining from him. Without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. But as I watched him leave, my heart sank. Ryan had no idea what had just happened. Neither did I. Because the truth hit me then, the man I thought was obsessed with me wasn't the real threat. It was the one pulling his strings. The one I had never seen coming. The moment I turned to face Ryan, the weight of what I had just discovered crashed down on me. As I stood there, processing what had just happened, I realized how much I had been blinded by fear, by the idea of control and manipulation. I had been chasing answers for so long, never seeing the bigger picture. The man who had consumed so much of my attention wasn't the endgame, he was just a pawn in a much larger game, one that I had only just begun to understand. The real threat wasn't his obsession with me, it was the unseen force pulling the strings from the shadows. Ryan's voice broke through my thoughts. "Are you okay?" He stepped closer, concern etched on his face. I could tell he had no idea how deep this went, how much I had allowed myself to be dragged into something far beyond what I had imagined. I think I am now, I said, trying to steady my breath. The weight of everything I had allowed to happen, was slowly starting to lift. The obsession, the manipulation, the feeling of being trapped, it all seemed so far away now. It wasn't over, but I knew what I had to do. I owed it to myself to break free, truly break free. No more games. No more lies. I would start over, rebuild my life on my terms, not someone else's. As I looked back toward the empty parking lot where the man had vanished, I knew I hadn't heard the last of him. But I also knew one important thing: I was no longer afraid. The truth had set me free, and whatever came next, I was ready for it. Because the real battle, I now realized, was not for attention, it was for my peace of mind. And that, I wasn't willing to lose.